Hello and welcome to Voice Sovereignty Why Leadership Must Start in the Body, a three-pillar framework for sustainable leadership. And before we begin, I want to properly introduce myself and really ground the work we're about to get into today. My name is Felicia Davis, and for over 2 decades, I've worked at the intersection of leadership, communication, and identity inside of corporations, universities, and executive leadership rooms. And my work has been trusted by organizations like Pepperdine University, Charles Schwab, USA Today, Vistage, and other organizations, that really understand that leadership today is less about command and control and more about coherence, clarity, and credibility. And I've spent years teaching leaders how to communicate clearly, lead with presence, and build influence that really lasts. And here's what I've learned, especially from women in high responsibility roles. Leadership does not break down because people lack skill or intelligence. It breaks down when the body is operating under chronic pressure. And voice sovereignty is not about becoming louder, more confident, or even more polished. It's really about learning how to lead from a body that feels safe enough to tell the truth. Let that land for a minute because it's so very important that we understand the importance of where leadership actually begins. Because for too long, leadership development has really been focused on things like strategy, messaging, and executive presence. And don't get me wrong, all those things are very, very important, but they do not exist in isolation. But when the nervous system is overloaded, what happens? The voice starts to tighten, right? And when the body doesn't feel safe, clarity starts to dissipate and even disappear. And when presence feels more like performance, then leadership becomes exhausting. This work introduces you to my three pillar framework that restores alignment between your nervous system, your communication, and your executive presence. Because sustainable leadership doesn't start with technique, it starts in the body. It's so very important that we get that because when your body and your voice are aligned, people don't just hear you, they actually trust you. So let's begin. So let's talk about what this training is and what it's not. I want to be clear that this is not a burnout talk. It's not a productivity lesson, and it's not another conversation about doing less or setting better boundaries. Those things are very, very important, but you can find those things other places. That's not why you're here today. In the next 20 to 25 minutes, what I want to show you is why burnout is often a signal and not a personal failure, how leadership strain shows up first in the body, then in communication, then in presence, and in that order. I'm also going to share with you those, really unpack those three pillars that restore clarity, authority, and sustainability without asking you to become louder, tougher, or to become someone that you're not. And if you're listening to this, I know, is that chances are you're very successful on paper, but you're tired in a way that rest does not fix. And you're not tired because you don't love your work. Now, let's be real. There are days when we're just over it, right? But in general, you're not tired because you don't love your work. You're not tired because you're incapable, but you're tired because something in the way you've been leading no longer fits. For years, I believed that burnout was the cost of being competent, being trusted, the one who could handle it all. But I was wrong. And I know that because my body eventually made the decision that I wouldn't. I simply would not make it. I had two stress induced strokes while serving in executive leadership. And it wasn't because I was weak, but it was because my body had been carrying what my voice had been trained to suppress. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because as I mentioned before, burnout is not a failure, it's a signal. Now, sometimes the signal is subtle, right? And we just miss it. And sometimes it's very loud and we choose to ignore it. And for women in leadership, it's often a signal that your body, your voice, and your presence are no longer aligned. And we must get back in the driver's seat so that we are not only in control, but we're very, very intentional around how we're showing up as leaders. And let me ground this in reality for a moment because silence is very, very expensive. As I was preparing for this, I found some research from MIT Sloan, and they found that less than 50% of employees consistently speak up to their managers, and almost 18% never ever speak up at all. There's another organization called Crucial Learning, and they found that nearly 9 out of 10 professionals have felt emotionally or physically unsafe speaking their truth at work. And every single time a high stakes conversation is avoided, it costs organizations on average 7,500 per incident. Now, I want to let that settle for a moment, especially if you're a leader responsible for revenue, reputation, and results, because this is impacting being able to recruit the right people, retain the right people, engage the right people is impacting everything. So this is extremely important. I hope you're leaning in right now. But here's the part that no one talks about. The cost isn't just financial. The cost is carried in the body of the leader who stays silent, the leader who softens the message, the leader who holds all the tension just so everyone else can stay comfortable. And that cost, well, that accumulates as burnout. And this is why the old leadership model, the one that's built on endurance, composure, and emotional containment, that's why that model is breaking down. And it's because it's asking the human system to absorb what it was never designed to hold indefinitely. And here's something I think we all need to anchor into: burnout is not a time management problem, it's not a resilience gap, it's not a boundary issue. Burnout is what happens when your body carries what your voice was never allowed to say. And until we address that, no amount of rest, no amount of strategy, or no amount of productivity tools will fix it. I know we have all these different tools and they may give us a temporary fix, but what we really want to do is we want to get to the root cause of all of this, and that's where this work begins. And this is exactly why I created the voice sovereignty framework. It was not only something that I needed, but working with so many leaders, I found that this was really the secret that was missing in all the work that we see around leadership, burnout, stress, whatever the case might be. But the voice sovereignty framework, it rests on 3 pillars: nervous system regulation, embodied communication, and executive presence. So let's unpack each one of these. So, what do these survival patterns actually look like in leadership? Well, pillar number one is nervous system regulation. And when leadership pressure overwhelms the nervous system, it doesn't announce itself as stress. It actually shows up as adaptive behaviors that really are often praised until they quietly cost you clarity, health, and authority. So here's what's really happening underneath. There are like 5 different things that I've seen consistently. And here's where you may want to grab a pen and paper and take down some notes. The first thing is vigilance. Now, vigilance is where you're always scanning, you're always bracing, you're always just one step ahead. And vigilance looks like being constantly alert to shifts in tone, in mood, or in expectation, and you're tracking what isn't being said. You're anticipating reactions before they happen, and you're preparing for impact before it arrives. And in leadership, this often sounds like, now, see if you hear yourself in one of these. I need to be ready for anything. I cannot let my guard down in this place. If I miss something, it'll be on me. And while vigilance keeps you competent, you're never at ease. Your body stays on watch even when the meeting is over. Okay. The second one is urgency. Now, urgency feels is where everything feels time sensitive, even when it's not. Urgency is the that internal pressure to move fast, to respond immediately in order to stay ahead. And not because it's required, but because slowing down actually feels unsafe. And urgency, it shows up in things like rushing decisions, answering those emails instantly, filling that silence too quickly, and equating speed with leadership. And while urgency creates motion, it never creates clarity. And over time, it trains your body to live in a constant state of almost too late. Now, number three is overfunctioning. Now, overfunctioning is when you're carrying what was never meant to be yours. Overfunction is when you're taking responsibility for others' emotions, others' clarity, others' follow through, and outcomes that you don't even fully control. You fix, you smooth, you compensate, and you carry even without being asked, right? And it sounds like this. Now, I'm going to raise my hand, not one, not two, probably three times on these, right? It sounds like this. If I don't handle it, it won't get done. It's easier if I just take care of it. And over functioning looks like leadership, but internally it's depletion. Now, here's one I know we all can relate to at some point in our career or even in our life, right? And that is people pleasing. And this is where you're shaping yourself to maintain harmony. Now, people pleasing is not about being nice, even though some people think that's what it is. It's about regulating the room so that you don't become the disruption. And it shows up in you softening your truth, avoiding those direct statements, over explaining in order to be understood, choosing approval over accuracy. And this cost isn't just exhaustion, it's actually erosion of self trust. So very important for you to understand. Now, this final one is called emotional containment. This is where you're holding everything in so nothing spills out. Emotional containment is when you feel everything, but you express very little. You stay composed, you stay measured, you stay professional, but inside the pressure is mounting, it's building. And it often shows up in things like jaw tension, shallow breathing, headaches, fatigue that rest just will not fix. And containment, while it keeps things orderly, when it comes but when it becomes chronic, the body absorbs what the voice never ever releases. And so these are the five things, the way this stuff it looks like this is when it stops being a symptom, it becomes a signal, and a signal that you have to start paying attention to. And so what's the through line here? Well, it's that each of these patterns is adaptive. Each one likely helped you succeed. But when they become permanent, they stop being tools and they start becoming a strain, right? And burnout is not caused by doing too much, it's caused by carrying too much internally for too long. And this is why nervous system regulation isn't optional, it's foundational. And this is why voice sovereignty does not begin with strategy, it begins with the body. This is why burnout shows up even in leaders who look like they have it all together. I once worked with a senior leader whose calendar looked completely reasonable, but her body was in a constant state of bracing. Her jaw tight, breath shallow, her shoulders lifted. And every single meeting required her to prepare for impact. And once we started focusing on regulation, not mindset, not performance, her decision making became clearer and her reactivity dropped within weeks. Now, I'm going to keep it real with you. A dysregulated nervous system cannot sustain clarity, authority, or trust, no matter how talented you are. Take a moment with me now. I want you to drop your shoulders, soften your jaw, and take a slow breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. This is where leadership stability begins. But regulation alone is not enough. So let's keep going. Okay, so here we are at pillar number 2, which is embodied communication. And here's where many leadership approaches stop way too early, because something that you may not realize is that you can regulate your nervous system and still burn out. You might be saying, well, why is that, Felicia? Well, because regulation without expression becomes calm suppression. And so if you're not tuned in to how you're feeling and how your body's feeling and how you're showing up, you can fall into this trap where you're still feeling not enough energy. You're still feeling like you can't focus. You're still feeling drained. That's because burnout is still happening. And if you're not really committed to really being tapped in and tuned in to your body and how you're feeling, how that's manifesting in the work that you're doing, you will fall into this calm suppression thing. So, what do we need to do? Let's talk about it. Okay, it's probably going to get a little spicy now because I want to talk about how conditioning shapes women's leadership communication. And really, when you think about it, women leaders are rarely taught to speak from authority first. They're taught to manage the environment before they deliver the truth. And that conditioning shows up in very specific ways. The first is around softening your truth to keep the peace. Maybe you're editing reality so that other people stay comfortable. You're softening your truth, and that means that you're diluting the message so that it lands gently, even when clarity requires you to be firm. And it may sound like this. I may be wrong, but just to add a thought, I don't want this to come off the wrong way. And the intention there is harmony, but the cost is precision. And over time, leaders learn that truth must be palatable in order to be permitted, and that their role is to smooth impact rather than to really name what's really happening, really, really, really getting real. The other thing is around over explaining in order to be understood. Now, this is proving legitimacy before you're speaking. Over explaining is often rooted in the belief that clarity alone is not enough, that credibility must be earned in real time. And it shows up in things like excessive context, layered justifications, anticipating objections before they're even raised. And not because the leader lacks clarity, but because she's been conditioned to expect doubt. And this creates cognitive fatigue and drains authority from otherwise strong decisions. Now, the next one is around asking permission instead of making statements. And this is where you're deferring your authority, the authority that you already have. You're deferring it. Like permission seeking sounds polite, it sounds collaborative, and it sounds inclusive, but often it's replacing that grounded leadership that's necessary. And it shows up in things like saying, would it be okay if, or I just wanted to check, or does that make sense? And instead, you should be stating things like, this is the direction, this is the decision, and this is what's needed next. right? And the nervous system learns that leadership must be sanctioned externally before expressed internally. Woo! Woo, I told you it's going to get a little spicy. Now, the next one is around managing emotional tone before content. And this is where you're regulating others before expressing yourself, right? Women leaders are often acutely aware of how their tone might be interpreted, whether it's as assertive, whether it's as emotional, intense, or cold. And so what do? They start to adjust the volume, adjust the pacing, adjust the facial expression, adjust their warmth before they even deliver the message. And this constant self monitoring creates an internal strain that separates the voice from the body. And that leader becomes composed, but not coherent. And so, what's the deeper pattern here? Well, none of these behaviors are accidental. They are intelligent adaptations to environments where directness is penalized, where emotional labor is expected, and where authority is conditional. And over time, women don't lose their voice, they learn to pre edit it. And this is why burnout persists even after confidence improves, because confidence without embodiment still requires a body to hold what the voice never releases, right? With the voice, it's never releases or releases it too carefully. And I'll never forget after my second stress induced stroke, when I started getting back into the group of things, I always had a habit of before I would start speaking, I'd have these speaking engagements and I'd have someone safe in the room who I could trust, so I could lean into, because I was still trying to learn how to use my voice with authority again. And I would always, after that speaking engagement, I'd always go over to my friend and say, how did I sound? How did, were my words coming out good? And I guess that's okay. But what was really happening is that I hadn't regulated my body enough to feel confident in the fact that I was already in the room, right? I was there. I had been invited for a reason. And I wasn't allowing myself to rest in that knowing, also in the knowing that what I was there to share was going to be something that was going to help someone else move to the next level. And so this stuff is so very important when we think about the conditioning that we receive as leaders. It's important that not only we understand it, but now we can tap into how to really close the gaps that are getting in the way of our sovereignty as leaders. So let's keep going. So this is what I call the reclaiming shift. And this is where voice sovereignty doesn't mean that you're speaking louder. It means that you're speaking without self erasure. And when nervous system regulation and embodied communication are in place, truth does not need cushioning. Clarity does not require justification, and authority certainly does not ask for permission. The voice becomes steady because the body feels safe telling it. I once worked with a leader who said this: I'm so much more calmer now, but I still leave meetings feeling exhausted. And the reason why is because she was still editing herself. Even though she was calm, she hadn't developed the authority and the muscle to stop editing, right? She's still editing herself. And so once we shifted how she spoke, her pace, her tone, her posture, all of it, the exhaustion started lifting, right? It wasn't because she talked more, but it's because her body no longer had to hold an unsaid truth. And so here's the distinction: expression without regulation creates emotional leakage, and regulation without expression creates internal pressure. And sovereignty requires both. And this is what embodied communication is all about. Okay, so let's get into it. embodied communication, it sounds like this. It sounds like clear statements where you're not over explaining, you're not softening your truth so that it lands gently. You're just saying what needs to be said and you're saying it cleanly and directly. It sounds like grounded pacing. You're not rushing to fill space. You're okay with a little quiet in some of those powerful conversations. You're not speeding up to manage others' reactions. Your breath actually sets the rhythm and not the room. It uses fewer words, but it's telling much more truth because when your body feels safe, you don't need languages and armor. You just trust what you're saying and that it can stand on its own. And most importantly, it feels like relief because your body is no longer holding unsaid things. There's no tension in the jaw, there's no tightness in the chest, there's no silent negotiation happening underneath your words. And this is what it feels like when your voice and your body are fully aligned and finally telling the same truth. Oh, I love this stuff, and I hope that you're leaning all the way in and loving it just as much as I am sharing it with you. Let's keep going. Now, last and certainly not least is pillar number three, which is all about executive presence. But before we go any further, we need to name something honestly. Women are constantly told they need more executive presence, but almost never ever told what that actually means. It's offered as feedback without definition, a critique without a map. Be more confident, take up more space, learn to read the room, command authority. I mean, what does all that mean? Because no one explains how or what actually being asked of the body and the voice and the nervous system to sustain that expectation. So women do what they've always done. And what is that? They perform it. They borrow mannerisms. They deepen their voice artificially. They adjust posture without safety. They mimic leadership styles that do not belong to them. And then they wonder why they're exhausted. And it's not because leadership is heavy, it's because performance is. So let's get clear. Executive presence is not about confidence. I know we hear that a lot. It's not about being more polished. It's not about being louder. It's not about performance because we already know that that leads to exhaustion. But what is it really about? There it is. Executive presence is about coherence. It's what happens when your nervous system is regulated, your voice is aligned with your truth, and your body is no longer bracing for impact. And when those three are in sync, people feel it. And not because you're louder, not because you're sharper, but because you are steady. I've watched leaders say the exact same words, the same agenda, the same message in the same room. But when their internal state shifted, the room shifted with them. Because in high stakes environments, people are not tracking words first, they're tracking things like safety, certainty, and stability. And the truth is this: teams don't follow the loudest leader, they follow the most regulated one. And presence stabilizes faster than strategy, and it calms before it convinces. And this is why presence can't be taught as a skill alone. Presence is not something you project, it's something that you hold. And when executive presence is embodied, not performed, leadership stops costing the body. And this is where everything starts to integrate. And at the end of the day, burnout ends when leadership becomes embodied. Not when you push harder, not when you optimize more, but when your body, your voice, and your presence stop pulling against each other. So very important that we get this. And this is the work beneath leadership branding, beneath the influence work, and also beneath the impact that you're having. So very critical that we understand how all this stuff lines up together. And it happens in a certain sequential order in order to be effective. And so, if what you've heard today landed with you, here's what I invite you to do next. This training is not designed to give you another tactic or another checklist. It's designed to help you feel clearly where your leadership coherence has slipped, not just in strategy or outcomes, but in your body, your voice, and your presence. And now that you can see those dynamics more clearly, you understand what the gaps are for you personally. The next step isn't another workshop, at least not yet. It's having a conversation where we explore where your leadership is carrying strain under pressure. We talk through what coherence would actually look like for you in practice, and we determine which next step is right for your growth. That might be private mentoring with me, it might be in our group container like Elevate, or it may be in the Sovereign Sessions live experience. This is not a sales call, it's really a sovereignty conversation. And so, if you're ready to lead from your center and not just your mind, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Let's talk. All right, so I have filled my promise to you. I've shared everything that I committed to sharing with you. Now the ball is in your court. You have to make the next move. And that next move might be, depending on how you feel about what you learned, scheduling your sovereign conversation. And I won't decide for you, but I will help you decide what direction actually fits you because your body already knows where your leadership is costing. Now is your turn to make the next move. And I'll leave you with this. Burnout ends when your body, your voice, and your leadership stop pulling in different directions. And what's so amazing about that is that you actually have complete control on how to stop that from happening. I cannot wait to talk with you. And even if we do not talk, please take what you learned today and start putting just one thing into action so that you can start turning around how you're showing up as a leader, and more importantly, so that you're showing up with voice sovereignty so that you can lead sovereignly.